The starship Sojourner hung in the silent black, a silver needle against the velvet dark. It was a ship of the galactic concordance, a place of soft light, gentle hums, and quiet voices. Its crew were thinkers, observers, and catalogers. They were not soldiers. On the bridge, Captain Minsu watched the main screen. It showed a dull red star and a ring of unstable, rocky worlds. His face was calm, but his dark eyes were tired. This was a long mission, far from the green and peaceful worlds of the Concordance. He missed the sound of rain. Another day, another set of rocks to scan, said a voice beside him. It was June, his chief communications officer. Her smile was easy, a common sight on the bridge. She was the best xenolinguist in the sector, but here there were no languages to hear. Only static and the click of asteroids. The minerals here could power 100 worlds. June, Minsu replied, his voice soft. Patience. Patience is my middle name, she said, turning back to her console. Her screens showed flowing lines of data, the heartbeat of empty space. The routine was simple. The Sojourner would drift near a planet, send out its probes, and listen. It listened for the magnetic songs of stars, for the whisper of cosmic dust, for anything of scientific value. It was not listening for a call, especially not a call like this. It began as a spike on June's panel, a jagged, raw burst of energy across every frequency. Not a clean concordance beacon, but a scream of data. Captain, June said, her playful tone gone. I'm picking up an anomalous broadcast. Source is the 4th planet. It's repeating. Minsu straightened in his chair. Natural phenomenon? The pattern is too regular. It's artificial. Her fingers danced across the console, pulling the signal apart. It's a composite. Audio and a compressed visual feed. The structure is primitive. Brutally so. Put it on screen. Decode what you can. The main viewer shifted. The clean lines of sensor data vanished, replaced by a shaky, grainy image. It was a dark place, lit by flashing red emergency lights. The camera was low, as if held by someone running. The walls were rough rock, part of a cavern or a bunker. Shapes moved in the gloom, tall, spindly, and terrifying. They had too many jointed limbs and carapaces that gleamed under the strobing lights. They moved with a horrible, skittering speed. Ka, Minsu breathed, a chill running down his spine. The Kanda were a devouring swarm, a blight on the galaxy. The Concordance had lost worlds to them. They were a reason to run, not to fight. Among the shaky visuals, there were glimpses of other figures, humanoid, in bulky, solid armor, firing bright lances of light at the skittering shadows. Their weapons looked heavy, slow. For every Cathar that fell, 3 more seemed to take its place. The audio was a chaos of noise, the screech of the Cathar, the boom of explosions. Shouts of alarm. Geun worked furiously, her linguist's mind separating the layers. The language? It's not in the database. Not any concordance dialect or known lost tongue. She isolated a voice, a deep male voice, shouting orders. She ran it through every filter. The visual feed became more chaotic. A doorway, reinforced with metal, was buckling. The humanoid defenders were falling back, their circles shrinking. The camera swung, showing a room packed with civilians' faces pale with fear, children huddled together. Then it pointed at the failing door one last time before the signal cut to black for a second. When it returned, the image was static, from a fixed camera in a control room. A different human, a woman with a streak of dirt on her cheek and desperate eyes, looked directly into the lens. Her mouth moved. Got it. June whispered. The translator algorithm finally found a match. It was an ancient, buried file, labeled Archaeolinguists, Pre-Exodus Earth, Linguistic Root, Indo-European, Specimen, English. The file was millennia old. A museum piece. The woman's voice filled the bridge, translated by the cold concordance system into their own tongue. But the raw, human desperation broke through. Systems are failing. The outer tunnels are gone. We are the last. If anyone can hear this, we are on the mining colony of Hope's End, in the grinder system. The Cathar are everywhere. We have maybe hours. She swallowed, her eyes glistening. Our ancestors came from a world called Earth. We thought we were alone. We thought we were all that was left. A loud crash shook a room, and dust fell from the ceiling. She flinched, but didn't look away from the camera. Is anyone out there? Please, we are the last. Help us. The signal looped back to the beginning, to the shaky running footage. The bridge of the Sojourner was utterly silent. The gentle hum of the ship felt like a mockery. On the screen, the silent, repeating horror played out. Minsu's mind raced. Concordance directives were clear. First contact protocols for unknown species were lengthy, cautious. Engagement with a Cathar infestation was strictly forbidden. It was a death sentence. The Sojourner had no weapons, only shields strong enough to deflect debris. To answer this call was to invite the swarm onto his ship, to doom his crew, but to ignore it. Captain, June said softly. Her face was pale. The language. English, the database. It links to a species profile. Show me. She brought it up on a side screen. The header was stark. Species, humanity, Homo sapiens. Status, extinct. Last verified contact, 2034 standard cycles ago. Cause of extinction, global, thermonuclear conflict, species-wide societal collapse. Threat index, maximum. Notes, species exhibited unparalleled tribal aggression, technological acceleration, and environmental disregard, capable of extreme violence and ingenuity in equal measure. Considered a self-terminated existential risk. Extinct, Minsu whispered, looking back at the pleading woman on the main screen. They're not extinct. They're down there, dying. And the Cathar will make them extinct, June said. Her hand was clenched into a fist. We can't fight, sir. We can't even land. Minsu knew she was right. Every protocol, every rule of survival, screamed at him to log this, to mark the system for quarantine, and to jump away. To leave the ghosts of a dangerous dead species to their fate. He looked at the faces of his bridge crew, all different species, all gentle, all filled with a helpless horror. He looked at the frozen image of the human woman, her plea hanging in the air. He was a captain of the Concordance. His duty was to knowledge and peace. But a deeper, older duty stirred. The duty to answer a cry in the dark. June, he said, his voice firm now, leaving no room for debate. Package the entire signal. All visual and audio data. Append the planetary coordinates and our sensor logs of the Cathar energy signatures. Mark the transmission priority as absolute maximum. He took a deep breath. Label it. A dire plea for help. Transmit it to the nearest concordance relay buoy. Now. June didn't hesitate. Her fingers flew. Transmitting. The buoy will relay it to the core council and all adjacent sectors. It will take time, Captain. More time than those people have. I know, Minsu said, sinking back into his chair. He stared at the looping feed of the falling bunker door, the skittering shadows, the final frozen frame of human hope. The message shot through the void, a single spark hurled into a cold, vast network dot as the confirmation of sent receipt flashed on June's screen. The weight of his actions settled on him. He had just shouted into the galaxy about a nest of Cathar, and the last remnants of the most dangerous species ever recorded. He had no idea what, if anything, would answer. On the quiet bridge, the only sound was the hum of the ship and the soft, repeating sob from the speaker. Minsu closed his eyes for a moment, the ghost of the woman's face behind his eyelids. When he opened them, he looked at the star-filled viewer, a deep unease in his soul. "What have we done?" he whispered, a question for the silent stars. They gave no answer. The signal did not travel quietly. It raced at the speed of thought through the quantum relays of the Concordance network, a single screaming packet of data tagged with the highest priority. It landed in the serene halls of the Concordance High Council on the green world of Alara. Like a stone thrown into a still pond, Counselor Relaine, an elderly being with gentle silver fronds, called the emergency session. The great circular chamber, open to a peaceful sky, was filled with representatives of a dozen species. Hala displays shimmered, showing the grainy, horrifying footage from Hope's End. The screech of Cathar, the desperate human voice, filled the air. "This is a tragedy," Relaine said, his voice a soft rustle. "A profound tragedy. But we must be governed by logic, not emotion. The Cathar swarm in that system is rated Category 7. To engage it would require a fleet we do not have. The loss of life would be catastrophic, for no strategic gain." A Sullian delegate, her feathers puffed in agitation, spoke next. "Strategic gain? We speak of a sentient species facing extinction. Again, our records say humanity is extinct. Yet they live. This is a miracle. We have a moral duty. Our moral duty," countered a Vulpin scientist, his whiskers twitching, "is to the trillions in the Concordance. Sending our ships into a Cathar meat grinder to save a few hundred beings from a species noted for its own violent end is not duty. It is suicide. They are not even a member species. They are a historical footnote with a maximum threat index." The debate swirled for hours. Minsu's report was parsed, analyzed, and debated. The focus was on the Cathar, on fleet movements, on risk assessment. The humans in the bunker became an abstract point of data, a sentient asset of unknown value. Their pleas became background noise. June watched the proceedings from the Sojourner's Bridge, her heart sinking. The council moved with a slow, careful grace. They were deciding the fate of a world while drinking tea. Finally, a decision was reached. It was a compromise that satisfied no one's conscience, but followed all protocols. A single ship, the Observer-class vessel Beacon, was dispatched. Its mission was not to rescue, but to document. To witness the fall of Hope's End from a safe distance, to gather final scientific data on the Cathar, and to retrieve the crew of the Sojourner. It was a mission of mourning. Captain Minsu received the orders with a stone face. "So we are to be witnesses," he said to June, the words tasting bitter. "We asked for an army," June replied, her voice tight. "They are sending a historian." The Sojourner remained at the edge of the system, a silent, helpless sentinel. They watched the beacon arrive. It was a sleek, beautiful ship, shining under the red sun. It took up a position far from the fourth planet, its powerful scanners trained on the dying world. Down on the surface, the situation grew darker. The periodic bursts of signal from Hope's End were growing weaker, farther apart. The last one showed the control room darker. The woman, her name was Yuna. They had learned, looking gaunt. Power at 15%. Air scrubbers failing. They are digging. We can hear them digging. Then the signal had cut out and not returned. A heavy silence had settled over both Concordance ships. They were waiting for the end dot. It was a junior sensor operator on the beacon, a young Talon named Key, who first noticed the anomaly. His duty was to monitor deep space for any Cathar reinforcements. The screen was supposed to be empty. The grinder system was a dead end. of no interest to anyone. But something was there. "Captain," Key said, his voice confused. "I have unidentified signatures. At the system's heliopause, they just appeared." On the Sojourner, Minsu's console lit up with the same shared data. 3 contacts. Massive. Their energy profiles were like nothing in the Concordance database. They were not smooth or efficient. They were raw, roaring torrents of power, like miniature stars on the move. "Are they KTHAR?" June asked, her breath catching. "No," Minsu said, studying the data. Cathar bioships are organic, pulsing. These are mechanical, brutal. Look at their acceleration. The 3 signatures did not drift. They did not approach cautiously. The moment they were detected, they shifted trajectory with a violence that defied normal physics. One moment, they were at the edge of the system. A heartbeat later, they were halfway in, moving at a speed that should have torn any known material apart. Their course was a straight, unwavering line. A bullet's path. Its target, the 4th planet. Hope's End. Panic flickered through the Concordance comms. The beacon hailed the unknowns on all frequencies. There was no response. The ships ignored every standard greeting, every peace protocol dot as they streaked into the inner system. Visual telescopes finally locked on. The images that came up on the screens made Minsu go cold. They were not ships of graceful lines or gleaming alloy. They were colossal, irregular, and pitted. They looked less like vessels and more like asteroids that had been roughly hollowed out and fitted with monstrous engines and weapons ports. They were scarred with the marks of countless impacts and energy burns, a history of violence written on their hulls. They were the color of old blood and cold iron, and on the side of each one facing the planet was a single word. It was etched in massive, simple glyphs of common galactic, the language of the Concordance. The word was not a name. It was a statement. It was a warning. Vengeance. "By the quiet stars," June whispered, the word hanging in the silent air of the bridge. The 3 asteroid ships did not slow. They did not hail the Concordance vessels. They shot past the beacon and the Sojourner, their gravitational wakes shaking the smaller ships. They moved into a tight triangular formation high above the besieged planet. Blotting out the light of the red sun dot then, they went silent. Their roaring engines cut to zero. They were simply there, hanging in the orbit of Hope's End. Dark, motionless, ominous dot on the beacon. The captain was demanding answers from the council. On the Sojourner, Minsu could only stare. The plea had been answered, not by the gentle historians of the Concordance. Something else had been listening, something that traveled in tombs of iron and bore a name of wrath. The combs crackled to life. It was not a voice from the asteroid ships. It was a weak, broken signal from the surface. Yuna's voice, barely a whisper, choked with dust and hope. Something is in orbit. The digging. It has stopped. The Cathar. They are retreating from the lower tunnels. What is happening? Who are you? Minsu looked from the scarred, silent vessels above to the fading signal from below. The dire plea for help had been sent. And now, the most dangerous beings had arrived. He had no idea if they were salvation or a second, even faster doom. He could only watch and wait as the giant, silent ships began to turn their weapon ports towards the surface of the world. The silence from the 3 asteroid ships was a physical weight. It pressed on the bridge of the Sojourner, on the hopeful whisper from the planet below, on the frantic questions from the beacon. The massive, scarred vessels simply hung there, dark against the red sun. Then, a light. A single bright data pulse, aimed not at the Concordance ships, but broadcasting in every direction. It was a compressed, powerful burst. It hit the Sojourner systems and overrode every channel. flooding the main screen with stark, blocky text in Common Galactic. Stand clear. Kill box established. The message vanished as quickly as it came. Before Captain Minsu or Jun could speak, the underbellies of the three ships erupted, not with weapon fire, but with thousands of smaller objects. They fell like metallic rain, streams of descending fire that painted the upper atmosphere with brief, violent streaks, life pods. June asked, her voice thin. No, Minsu said, watching the sensors. Too fast. Too hard. They're not landing gently. The objects punched through the cloud cover, disappearing from view. The Sojourner's long-range scanners, aimed at the planet, began to paint a new, horrifying, and awe-inspiring picture. They did not land near the last known human stronghold. They targeted the Cathar. The pods slammed directly into the densest swarms surrounding the bunker complex, into the tunneling masses, into the chitinous nodes that seemed to command the smaller creatures. Each impact sent a shockwave of debris and Cathar bodies flying dot, and then the pods cracked open. From each one, a single figure emerged. They were not like the bulky, slow defenders seen in the distress signal. These were something else. They wore armor of sharp angles and thick, layered plates, colored in dappled grays and blacks like storm clouds. It made them look huge, monstrous. They moved with a speed that was disorienting. One moment they were standing by their pod, the next they were among the Cathar, moving in blurs of controlled violence. Their weapons spoke in short, sharp barks of sound and light. No graceful energy beams. These were kinetic projectiles and focused plasma bursts that tore through Cathar carapace like it was paper. They did not fight in a defensive line. They attacked. They broke into small, coordinated units and cut deep into the swarms, sowing chaos. June had the sensor feed on a secondary screen, her hand over her mouth. The efficiency was terrifying. It was not a battle. It was an eradication. The Cathar, a mindless tide of claws and hunger, seemed to falter for the first time. Their advance towards the human bunker stopped, then reversed as they turned to face this new, more immediate threat. One of the human warriors became a focal point on the scanner. His armor was marked with a single faded yellow stripe on the left shoulder. He moved like a force of nature, leading a wedge of 5 others directly towards the main entrance of the besieged complex, which was still choked with Cathar. He used a heavy rotary weapon that fired blindingly fast, clearing a path of shattered limbs and oozing green ichor. Focus on that unit, Minsu said, his professional curiosity overriding his dread. Magnify. The screen zoomed in, shaky from atmospheric interference. They saw the warrior calcine Taiyang stenciled roughly on his chest. Plate reached the collapsed bunker doors. He didn't try to open them. He gestured, and one of his squad placed a small device on the metal. A flash, a muted thump, and a hole was ripped cleanly through. Without a pause, Taiyang went in first. June couldn't stand it anymore. The silent, brutal ballet on the sensors was too much. They were watching, but they were not part of it. They were just ghosts in the sky. Against all protocol, her fingers flew across her console, locking onto the old human emergency frequency, the one the distress signal had used. What are you doing? Minsu asked, but it was too late. She opened a channel and spoke, her voice trembling only slightly. Unidentified human forces. This is the Galactic Concordance vessel Sojourner. Identify yourselves. What is your intention? For a long moment, there was only static and the distant filtered sounds of battle from the surface feed. Then the channel crackled. The voice that came back was male, gritty, and breathless. It was punctuated by the deep thump of his weapon and the screech of a dying Cathar. Our intention, the voice Taiyang's voice grunted, is to do what you couldn't. There was a burst of fire. Now shut up. You're clogging the channel. The link went dead. Min-Su and June exchanged a look. There was no diplomacy there. No gratitude. Only a fierce, focused purpose. Inside the bunker, it was chaos of a different kind. The lights were failing. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of fear. Yuna, the young engineer who had sent the final pleas, was trying to rally the last 50 defenders at the inner barricade. They held mining tools and a few overheating plasma rifles. The sound of skittering claws was right outside the heavy door. Then a new sound. Sharp, percussive booms from the outer tunnels. Screeches of agony. Cathar agony. The skittering at the door stopped, replaced by sounds of a different fight. Then silence. With a deafening bang, the metal door of their refuge was blown inward, clanging to the floor. Smoke poured in. Through it, a giant armored figure stepped, his weapon sweeping the room. The survivors flinched back, raising their pitiful tools. The figure's helmet turned, scanning. He saw the terrified civilians, the exhausted defenders. With a hiss, the front of his helmet retracted, folding back into the collar of his armor. The face underneath was human. Sweat-streaked, with a sharp jaw and dark eyes that held no softness, only a piercing intensity. He looked young, but his eyes were old. Who's in charge here? He barked. Yuna stepped forward, her knees weak. I am? Yuna? Are you from the Concordance? Tai Yang's expression didn't change. No. He gestured with his head. We're the answer to your call. Is this all of you? Yes, the last. The others? I know. He cut her off, his voice softening just a fraction. We'll get you out. My squad will hold this room. The rest of my unit is clearing a path to the surface. He looked at the ragged group, at their hollow faces. Can any of you hold a weapon that isn't a rock? A few nodded. He gestured to one of his own warriors, who began handing out compact, brutal-looking rifles from a pack. Power cell here. Safety here. Point at the bugs and pull. Don't point at my people. On the Sojourner, they watched the sensor blips converge. Taiyang's squad and the survivors were moving, a small, bright cluster pushing towards the surface, meeting with other human units that carved a path through the dwindling Cathar resistance. It was a brutal, efficient evacuation. June watched the screen, the ghost of Taiyang's face in her mind. He had not come with words of hope or galactic brotherhood. He had come with a weapon and a plan. The dire plea had been answered not by saviors, but by soldiers. And as she watched the last human survivors emerge into the pale sunlight of Hope's End, surrounded by the grim, armored figures who had pulled them from the abyss, she understood one thing. These humans were not just dangerous to the Cathar. The look in Taiyang's eyes, the chill in his voice, spoke of a danger that went much, much deeper. The surface of Hope's End was a gray, rocky plain under a bruised red sky. It was not a place of beauty, but to the ragged group of colonists huddled near the blown-open bunker doors, the cold air tasted like freedom. They coughed, blinked in the dim light, and clung to each other. Around them stood the armored humans, a ring of grim, silent statues. Their weapons were not lowered. They scanned the horizon, the rocks, the sky. Taiyang stood apart, his helmet sealed again, speaking in short bursts into his combs. The occasional sound of a distant final gunshot echoed across the plain. Yuna moved towards him, her legs unsteady. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with a burning need to understand. You said you were the answer to our call, she said, her voice raspy from dust and disuse. But where did you come from? The Concordance? We thought we were the last. Taiyang turned his helmeted head towards her. For a long moment, he was silent. Then, with a hiss, his faceplate retracted. His expression was unreadable. The Concordance didn't send us. They sent a watch party. He nodded towards the sky where the Sojourner and Beacon hung, tiny specks. We heard the signal. The old signal. The one in the old tongue. How? Yuna asked. Our colony has been lost for centuries. Our ancestors left Earth before the Great Silence. We thought everyone else died. A humorless, tight smile touched Tai Yang's lips. They almost did. He looked at his squad, at the other warriors securing the perimeter. They moved with a tense, predatory grace, nothing like the worn-out colonists. You want to know where we're from? We're from the fire that didn't go out, the pieces that were too hard to burn. He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. Your history is wrong. Humanity didn't have a great silence. We had a great war, not against aliens. Against ourselves? It wasn't quick. It was a slow, ugly rot. Faction against faction, tribe against tribe. By the end, Earth wasn't a tomb. It was a furnace. Yuna felt a coldness seeping into her that had nothing to do with the planet's air. The old stories spoke of a parting, a tragedy, but not this. The survivors, Tai Yang continued, his eyes distant, weren't the best of us. They were the worst, the most stubborn, the most vicious, the ones who could look at a poisoned sky and still find a reason to fight the group in the next bunker. We fled, not together, in broken pieces. My people, we went to the dark places, the edges of maps. We built our homes inside asteroids, in the ruins of dead stars. And we waited. Waited for what? Yuna whispered. For an enemy, he said simply, meeting her eyes. A real one. Something to point all of. This, he gestured to himself, to his warriors, to the destruction around them, at. We are a weapon, Yuna. A weapon that was built and then had nothing left to shoot at but itself. The Kaitha? He almost spat the word. They're a target. A way to use the war machine without turning it on each other again. Your plea, it was a gift. The truth was a physical blow. They weren't rescued out of compassion. They were a mission objective. A way for a lost, angry people to bleed out their violence on something else. A deep, resonant hum suddenly vibrated through the ground. It came from above. One of the massive asteroid ships was descending, lowering itself like a falling mountain until it hung just a few hundred meters above the plane. A wide bay door opened on its underside, revealing a brightly lit hangar. It was time to go dot. As Tai Yang began barking orders for the evacuation, Yuna grabbed his armored arm. Wait, your history. Our real history. Do you have it? All of it? He looked down at her hand, then at her face. He saw not just fear, but a scientist's need to know. He gave a short, sharp nod. He reached to his belt, unclipped a small, rugged data chip, and pressed it into her palm. It was warm from his suit's systems. Everything, he said, his voice low. The good we did. The beauty we made. The horrors we unleashed. How we broke our own world. How we broke each other. It's all there. Our sins. Don't romanticize it. The colonists were being ushered towards cargo lifters that rose to meet the ship. Yuna held the chip like a live coal. You're coming with us, right? Tai Yang's helmet combs buzzed. He tilted his head, listening. His expression, already hard, turned to stone. He looked past her, towards the edge of the star system. No, he said, the word final. He pointed to the sky, to the Sojourner. You're going with them. On that Concordance ship. What? Why? Because the main course just arrived, he said, his voice flat. On the sensor display on his wrist, a new contact bloomed. It was vast, a tangled, pulsing biological mass trailing tendrils of energy. The K-Far Hive ship. It was a world killer and it was heading straight for Hope's End, drawn by the destruction of its brood. Yuna's blood ran cold. You can't fight that. It's too big. We're not going to fight it, Taiyang said, his helmet sliding shut with a final click. His voice was now a filtered, metallic growl from the external speaker. We're going to erase it. He turned and began walking towards a different lifter, one that would take him back to his command ship. Over his shoulder, his last words came, calm and terrible. Tell your new friends. Tell them to get far away, and to remember what they saw here. The cargo lifter carrying Yuna and the last colonists rose swiftly towards the waiting sojourner, which had moved in close at Taiyang's terse command. She watched through the open bay door as Taiyang's lifter rose towards the monstrous asteroid ship. The two other human vessels moved to join it, the three forming their tight triangle once more as her lifter docked with the sojourner. She was met by Captain Min-Su and June. Their faces were full of questions, but Yuna just clutched the data chip and looked past them. Out the viewport, the human ships were turning. They were not pointing their weapons at the approaching hive ship. Instead, they positioned themselves in a line between the planet and the approaching horror. Their engines flared, not to move, but to hold position. A strange, shimmering energy began to build between them, connecting the three vessels in a crackling triangle of light. On the bridge of the Sojourner, the sensor officer's voice was shrill with panic. Captain! Massive gravitational distortion building around the human vessels. Space-time readings are tearing. Min-Su didn't hesitate. Full emergency thrust, now. Get us out of this system. The Sojourner and the beacon turned and ran. As they fled, the last thing Yuna saw was the three scarred ships, silent and resolute, holding their ground against the living tide of the hive. They weren't preparing a weapon to fire. The Sojourner and the beacon fled. Their engines, designed for quiet journeys of discovery, screamed in protest as the captains pushed them far beyond their safety limits. The ships were not built for this. The crew were not built for this. On the Sojourner's bridge, the air was thick with tension and the sharp smell of overheated circuits. Yuna stood between Captain Min-Su and June, her knuckles white where she gripped a console rail. She could not look away from the main viewer, which was focused on the receding scene. The three human asteroid ships formed their perfect, terrible triangle. The K-Thar hive ship filled the space behind them, a nightmare of organic shapes and pulsing violet light, bigger than a moon. What are they doing? June whispered, more to herself than anyone. They are not firing weapons. They're power signatures. They are merging. She was right. The shimmering energy connecting the three ships intensified, wrapping them in a cocoon of twisting, impossible light. Space around them began to warp. It looked like a heat haze over a desert, but it was far more violent. The light from the red sun bent as it passed the triangle, creating a sickening halo. Min-Su watched the sensor data, his mind struggling to comprehend. They are not generating a shield. They are collapsing local gravity, creating a singularity point. The words felt alien in his mouth. The Concordance understood such theories. They were laboratory curiosities, horrors to be avoided. Not weapons. A new signal cut through the panicked channels. It was from the lead human ship. Taiyang's voice, stripped of all breathlessness, calm and clear as frozen glass. Concordance vessels. This is Commander Taiyang of the Vengeance. You called for the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. A pause, filled only with the hum of the distortion field building on the screen. You are right to fear us. On the viewer, the hive ship seemed to sense the trap. It tried to alter its course, to slow its colossal bulk. But it was too close, moving too fast. The space around the three human ships was now a swirling vortex of fractured reality. The hive ship's forward tendrils touched the event horizon of the artificial gravity. Well, happened next was not an explosion. It was an unraveling. The monstrous biological ship did not break apart. It stretched. Its fleshy hull, its pulsing energy nodes, its countless chambers, all of it was pulled towards the invisible point between the three asteroids like thread being sucked into a needle. It was silent from this distance, which made it worse. They watched a planet killer die, not with a bang, but with a terrible, slow morning tear. The human ships held their formation. They did not try to escape. Their own hulls groaned under the stress, pieces of scarred metal tearing free and spiraling into the vortex they had created. Taiyang's voice returned, final and absolute. Remember this. Use our example. Be better. Then the signal died. The gravitational anomaly reached its peak. The light bent so completely, it created a perfect black sphere for an instant. Then, with a flash that whited out the Sojourner's viewers even at their distance, it collapsed in on itself. When the screens cleared, there was nothing. No hive ship, no asteroid ships, no debris. Just empty space, slightly distorted, as if the universe itself was nursing a bruise. The bridge was utterly silent. The only sound was the steady beep of the ship systems and someone's ragged breathing. The monstrous threat was gone. The dangerous rescuers were gone. They had taken the enemy, and themselves, into a hole in reality and closed the door. Minsu finally found his voice, hoarse and quiet. All stop. Scan the area. For anything. The scans found nothing. No energy, no mass, no escape pods. Just the cold, quiet piece of a star system that was no longer under siege. Yuna slowly uncurled her fingers from the rail. She looked down at her other hand, still clenched in a fist. Slowly, she opened it. The small, warm data chip sat in her palm. It was the only physical thing left of them. She walked to an open console and, without a word, slotted the chip in. A simple menu appeared on the screen. Text files, video logs, image galleries, schematics, music files. It was not just a military log. It was a civilization's soul, packed into a tiny piece of crystal. She opened a random text file. It was a personal diary entry from someone named Eli, dated centuries ago from the early days of the war. It spoke of missing a place called a park, of the taste of real fruit, of fear for a sister. She opened an image file. It showed not a warrior, but a breathtakingly beautiful painting of an earth forest, sunlight filtering through green leaves. Then a schematic for a planet-cracking bomb. Then a symphony, complex and sad and hopeful. June came to stand beside her, watching the cascade of data. They gave you everything, she said, her voice full of awe. They gave us everything, Yuna corrected softly. She looked at Minsu. They were a warning and a gift. They showed us the peak of what we can become and the abyss we can fall into. They were both. Minsu walked to the main viewer, now showing a peaceful starfield. The red sun of the grinder system was just a dot. The colony on Hope's End was safe, its people saved. The cost had been the complete annihilation of the saviors. He thought of the Concordance Council, debating risk and protocol. He thought of the human woman's pleading face in the signal. He thought of Taiyang's grim, focused eyes and the final, calm acceptance in his last transmission. The most dangerous beings had not come to conquer or rule. They had come to spend their last, violent breath on a purpose other than their own destruction. They had used their final act to pass a torch not of war, but of choice. Set a course for concordant space, Minsu said, his voice firm now. He looked at the data on Yuna's screen, the art, the music, the weapons, the diary of a lost soul. We have a report to make. It will not be about minerals or threats. It will be about this. The sojourner turned, his nose pointing towards home. The mood on the bridge was no longer one of fear or even sadness. It was a heavy, solemn stillness. They were carrying a ghost and a mirror dot as the ship entered the calm of faster-than-light travel. June stayed at the viewport, looking at the streaking stars. In her mind, she saw not the terrifying warriors, but the painting of the forest, and she heard Taiyang's last words. She whispered them to the stars, not in fear, but as a promise, a memorial for the monsters who had answered the call. They were our monsters, and they answered our call.